We'll get more on this with Tom Packer. He's a fellow at the Centre of US Politics at University College London, joining me from there. So, Tom, firstly, how will Trump's presidency affect US-UK relations? Prime Minister Keir Starmer has spoken about unshakable foundations between the two, but could that possibly change over the next 4 years?
I mean, I thought the unpredictability point made by your previous journalist was a very strong one, that there's a high unpredictable element. I could easily see tensions between the governments. I doubt there will be any fundamental shift in the relationship. There's a very strong history of it. There's a so-called Five Eyes, very strong intelligence relationship. I also think there are potentially aspects where the British government might be able to get on better with the Trump administration. For example, the flip side of Trump's aggression on trade is that he's very keen to do deals. So there might be room for Britain to do a very strong trade deal with the US. But it relies a lot on circumstances. I think, ironically, there's sort of tension that both are, in a sense, very close to the other's politics. So the Starmer ministry has very strong sympathies for the Democratic Party. Trump's associates have very strong sympathies for some of the more outspoken voices on the right of British politics, particularly the so-called Reform Party, which is a relatively new right-wing party. So that could cause all kinds of tension. But at the same time, Trump is not fundamentally he's fundamentally very pro-British. The Starmer ministry is clearly very keen to work with Trump rather than against him. So I suspect there will also be good moments as well as some tricky ones.
Tricky ones, indeed, and I think everyone's bracing for that. Donald Trump himself has surrounded himself with people he seems to trust who gush over him and his ideas. Elon Musk is one of the people that comes to mind, and he's, of course, ruffled a few feathers, if I can put it that way, in the UK. But there are also a lot of these other tech giants who are standing behind Donald Trump, who will be at the inauguration today. Could they help or hinder the United States?
So I mean, it depends on what the US perspective is. I mean, obviously, the fact is the majority of people who work in tech, the majority of people who run tech are actually supporters of the Democratic Party. What's happened is that the Biden administration went quite aggressively after quite a lot of tech companies. I think Elon Musk's story is actually a slightly different one. And that's led to a backlash within tech. There was massive pressure on them to eliminate so-called misinformation, a lot of which tended to be very much misinformation from a Democratic Party point of view rather than the Republican point of view. But, the fact is, I mean, I have to give some credit to the US here. There has barely been a significant new industry created in Europe since the 1970s, including the UK. In America, they have these massive corporate giants, which are among the biggest companies in the world. These huge American.
Tom, I'm so sorry to have to cut in there. We just want to bring our viewers these live pictures from DC, where President-elect Donald Trump has just arrived with his wife, Melania Trump. I believe they're going to the church service, St. John's Church at Lafayette Square. This is a historic church in DC, and once that happens, it will be followed by tea at the White House. But there we have it, some of the first pictures today of US President-elect. He's set to be the 47th President of the United States, walking into that church there with the soon-to-be First Lady, Melania Trump. And Tom, once the inauguration is done, there's of course a much expected speech that Trump will be delivering. What do you expect or the tone will be from this speech?
I suspect, I mean, his tones often varies a lot. I suspect there will be a bit more than some accounts expect at the moment of attempts at sort of trying to bring people together to sound, quote, presidential. That would be my guess. And again, I think it's a brilliant point by your previous commentator. He's not very predictable on this kind of thing. I think also they're unveiling these web of executive orders, often on issues he regards as, correctly I would say, as real strengths of his politically, like immigration. So I expect those to be major themes of the speech as well. And they're clearly unveiling a whole set of executive orders. So I'd expect, by Trump standards at least, the speech to be quite tied to those. So doing stuff about so-called diversity programs, which Republicans argue are discriminatory, particularly against white heterosexual males, attempting to crack down on the border, reversing some of Biden's ones, for example, on energy policy. So I suspect that will be a major part of the speech. But one thing we've learned from last time is Trump can say things very strongly and aggressively. and it doesn't necessarily get delivered. So I do think even more than most statesmen, there's a certain degree, look at what he does, not what he says.
Yeah, it does seem, though, that he is looking to physically deliver with those up to 100 executive orders set to be signed throughout the day. But this would also be him trying to send possibly a message to those who have stood behind him, those who have voted for him, to say, on day one, I'm doing what I promised you that I would do, that he is, quote, making America great again.
Yes, absolutely. And also it's like delivering on some of his strongest issues, as well as immigration, as well as on some other issues. So the Biden administration was perhaps the most pro-choice, pro-abortion, depending how you see it, administration in US history. And I'd expect at least some of those executive orders, for example, to be reversed by Trump. One thing I'd say, though, is this reliance on executive orders. In some ways, it might make a big difference. So one of them is the idea of making it easier to fire civil servants. That could definitely happen. But it also partly reflects weakness. The Republican majorities in Congress, particularly in the House of Representatives, are very small. So it's actually very hard for them to pass legislation. So to some degree, the story of the next few years is going to be very heavily Trump doing executive orders, then being challenged in court, sometimes stopped in court, sometimes suspended for a bit. He's going to really struggle to pass that much in the way of earth-shaking regulations unless he's willing to do more left-of-centre agenda, which the Democrats will be on board for.
Yeah, what are some of the other challenges that he may face in trying to get through some of the reforms, as he calls it, that he wants to make to the country? Because it's not just, as you say, in the Congress and the Senate, where he's going to find that the Democrats will obviously be fighting him on a lot of things.
Yeah, so for example, on the immigration policy, so he's trying to restore the rule that people can't come in and claim asylum if they're crossing the border from Mexico. They have to do it from Mexico and so forth. The judiciary as a whole tends to be quite pro-immigration. Often, like you saw this last time, like virtually his entire agenda on immigration at various points, or a very large part of it, got blocked by judges. The Supreme Court is relatively conservative, relatively willing to let presidents do what they want in immigration. So I suspect we'll likely side with him on a lot of that. But you've got to get there first, and that often takes a long while. There's also a concept called persomatic backlash, which is basically when the president looks like he's taking the country in one direction, the public start to get worried and think it's going too far. So you've seen that a lot in immigration the last 4 years. Joe Biden did some extraordinary moves on immigration. So, for example, just giving automatic rights, allowing people who aren't legally in the country to apply for it outside the country and so forth. And that's led to a huge surge of anti-immigration sentiment. Whether on immigration or perhaps even more on other issues, if Trump's moving in a particular direction, the public opinion is going to move against it. And that's going to worry Republicans in Congress. That's going to make life more difficult for him pursuing his agenda. He's not a dictator. There's a very real sense that somebody like the Prime Minister of Turkey or the President and Prime Minister of Turkey or the Prime Minister of Britain has more power because they actually have a clear majority in their parliament. They can pass legislation through. The US president, in many ways, is actually a role with limited power, even though it's the most powerful country in the world.
Very interesting. Thank you so much, as always, for your analysis. Tom Packer there from University College London.
Thank you.